Welcome back to Good Distinctions. I'm your host, Will Wright, and joining me today is Mr. Stephen Mosher, the author of the new book from Tan Books, The Devil in Communist China from Mao Down to Xi. Stephen Mosher was the first American social scientist to visit mainland China. He was invited there by the Chinese government, where he had access to government documents and witnessed women being forced to have abortions under the new one-child policy. Mr. Mosher was a pro-choice atheist at the time, but witnessing these traumatic abortions led to him to reconsider his convictions and to eventually become a practicing Roman Catholic and pro-life. Mr. Mosher has appeared numerous times before Congress as an expert in world population, China, and the human rights abuses. He is a prolific author who has worked tirelessly since 1979 to fight coercive population control programs and has helped hundreds of thousands of women and families worldwide over the years. He currently lives in Virginia with his wife, Vera, and their 9 children. Mr. Mosher, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you today, Will.
I thoroughly enjoyed your book. I teach high school history and religion, and we do cover the communist revolution, the Bolshevik revolution in Russia. We also cover the takeover of China from the nationalists by Mao during the Civil War and the Cultural Revolution. And so it was wonderful to see all of the great research that went into this book. And I know this is by far not your first book on China. You've been very active in that field for some time. So the first question I have is fairly simple: is why this book and why now?
Well, yeah, this is not my first book. This is book like book number 12. And, you know, in the past, I've written books about Chinese history. I've written books about American perceptions of China, also a historical survey. I've written books about my year in a Chinese commune, the first book, Broken Earth, the Rural Chinese, about journeys into China, about Chinese Communist Party's ideology and history. But I've never really looked at the what I'm going to call the evil that is at the heart of this system of government. You know, Thomas Jefferson once said that the government is a dangerous servant and a tyrannical master, and I think you can see that tyrannical master in full display in China, which I think right now has succeeded in establishing a kind of high-tech digital dictatorship that even the Soviet Union may have aspired to, but did not achieve. It's a system in which the government feeds on waves of terror that it creates among the population, and is designed to keep individual Chinese in sort of individual cells of fear, so that they're afraid to speak out, afraid to assemble, afraid to meet and talk about political issues, afraid to offend the government in any way, because the government, Big Brother, is always watching. You know, if everyone has read 1984, I assume, by George Orwell, and in that story they were watching through the TV screen. Well, now, of course, they're watching through your cell phone. They're watching through your computer. You're looking into your computer. They're looking back at you. They're watching you as you make expenditures in China. The Chinese government now has the digital yuan, and so they know where everyone goes, where everyone is spending their money, who they associate with, what they say on social media, and all of that factors into a digital social credit score. And if your social credit score is high, you can, guess what, get a passport and an exit visa and travel out of the country. If your social credit score is high, you can fly inside the country. You can take the high-speed rail. You can get a low-interest rate loan to buy a home or a car. If your social credit score is low, none of that is possible. They won't let you out of China. They won't let you on high-speed rail. The only transportation available to you is the low-speed train that stops at every Podang station between Shanghai and Beijing and takes you a couple of days to get there. Life becomes very difficult. You may not be able to get a loan at all to buy a home or a car if your political credit score drops too low. So this is really the fulfillment of, I think, the ancient dream, really nightmare for the people, but dream of the leaders of the Chinese Communist Party, to be watching everyone everywhere in real time and make sure that they abide by the party line.
Well, the CCTV system in China, to my knowledge, is one of the most expansive in the world, and it's not just that they have facial recognition. I heard that they also have gait recognition. So if you're walking, it can identify a person based on just their walking patterns. I
Yes.
mean, really dystopic, terrifying things for any freedom-loving person.
Yeah,
You,
China has more surveillance cameras than any other country in the world. And if you list the top 20 cities in terms of surveillance cameras per 1,000 people in the population, guess what? All of the 20 cities are in China. So they're watching everybody, through and of course they're using artificial intelligence to identify people using face recognition and, as you say, gait recognition. They make everyone not only um, submit to you know they're doing biological testing now, getting saliva and blood samples from everyone in China, so they have everyone's genome. They also make them walk in front of a camera so that they can detect and store their gait, and that can be recognized. And the face recognition technology, everybody knows. How that works out in practice is this. If you're jaywalking in Beijing, the surveillance camera sees you, the face recognition technology and the gait recognition technology identifies you, and the fine for jaywalking is automatically deducted from your bank account without any human intervention necessary. So that's it's frightening to me to
yeah,
be
that's wild.
to be under surveillance all the time. And I will tell you that the Chinese Communist Party, as I detail in The Devil in Communist China, constantly engages in these political campaigns, one after the other after the other. And they may create a pretext for the campaign. For example, in the one-child policy, they created a pretext that the Chinese people were having too many children, and that for the good of the country, for the good of the state, for the good of the commune, that people should have only one child. That was the excuse, in part, for the government to target the unborn, eliminating 400 million unborn children over the course of 36 years, and maintain the muscular tone of the system. You see, you always have to be targeting. If you're the Chinese Communist Party, you always have to have an enemy. There always has to be a target for the hatred of the population to be directed towards, like the 2 minutes of hate, right, that we see sometimes in the movies. And that means that during the 1950s, the target was the landlords. The target was the people associated with the nationalist regime, anyone associated with the old regime. The target was rich peasants. The target was, in the late 50s, any rightist, anyone who criticized the government. Anyone who refused to join the commune system was beaten, and a lot of them were killed for refusing. The target in the Cultural Revolution was everybody who had books predating the revolution, or who had foreign contacts. And there always has to be a target for the hate to focus the energy of the Communist Party and the hatred of the Chinese people against the enemies of the people. And for 36 years, the enemies of the people were the unborn, which is quite remarkable. And then, of course, we had COVID, and the lockdowns in China were extraordinary. And I suppose at the beginning, there was a I know that there was a gross exaggeration of the dangers of the coronavirus in China, and the system sort of rejoiced and was gleeful over the prospect of locking down everyone in their apartments for weeks on end, because that's kind of the ultimate expression of control. The people in Shanghai I talked to, and 2 years ago, when 26 million people were locked down in their apartments because of the COVID scare, when basically the pandemic was over in China, said openly, this is a way of the government controlling us. And that's the ultimate form of control. You turn everyone's apartment into their prison cell. They can't go out. They can't get their medicines. They can't buy food. There were people who actually starved to death in their high-rise apartment buildings because they didn't have access to food. They ran out of food. So the regime operates on the basis it feeds on hate. And to create this hate, it has to have a group that it isolates and identifies as the opponents of everything that's good, the future of China, future economic development, and so forth. And once it exhausts that particular group, then it has to turn to another.
Well, and in the book, you speak to this this paragraph. I think sums it up very well. You say the ultimate instigator of the evil ideology that is communism, based as it is on hate and not love, is the Prince of Darkness. So there is a satanic element. That's why it is the sworn enemy of all that is good, true, and beautiful. Communism is not just a false gospel; it is, in a very real sense, the anti-gospel, Satan's latest and most successful attempt to turn man away from his creator. I think that summarizes it very well, because so often we see communism as sort of this, it just hasn't been tried properly yet, and these other lies and things that we love to hear. It's just it would be great if it was actually done properly, and I think there are people that legitimately believe that, and I think that your book, in many respects, goes through why that is nonsense and why America needs to wake up.
Well, absolutely, and this is probably one way to look at what's happening in China, is to say that it takes us back to the ancient temptation of the serpent in the garden, who basically said to Adam and Eve, if you eat of the tree, the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall be as gods. And the devil has always tried to convince human beings that they don't need God, and that they, on their own, using their own abilities, can create heaven on earth. They don't need to think about the hereafter, because the here and now they can create, in the here and now they can create a perfect world. But the end of that, those crusades always ends in death, because I think that the devil is the author of death. He cannot create anything; he can only destroy. And that God created the world, and the devil wants to destroy the world and the people in it. And one of his best tools in doing that is communism. The fantasy that one day everyone will be equal, that one day government will fade away, that one day everyone will work as hard as they can according to their ability, and everyone will receive according to their need. It's a violation of it's a complete misunderstanding of the nature of human beings, and it always leads to tyranny. It is a fantasy. And oddly enough, as I write in the book, the Chinese Communist Party admits that. It admits that an accurate account of the history of China, the history of the Communist Party, and an accurate account of the ideology of the Chinese Communist Party would be a mortal peril, a deadly threat to the continued rule of the Chinese Communist Party. Why, if you tell the truth about the fantasy of communism, if you tell the truth about the bloody history of the Chinese Communist Party, would it be a mortal threat to the Chinese Communist Party? Well, obviously, the party doesn't want the people to know that they're propagating a fantasy to deceive them, and that the actual history of China is one of one bloody purge, one cultural revolution, one famine after another. The Chinese Communist Party has turned out to be what I call the biggest killing machine in human history. Altogether, over the course of the Civil War and the purges and persecutions and the famine after the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, millions of more deaths, 100 million Chinese have been killed by the actions of the Chinese Communist Party. And then if you add to that the 400 million little victims of the one-child policy, not all unborn, by the way, many children were killed at birth. Illegal children were not allowed to survive. Children born with birth defects were not allowed to survive. Twins were not allowed to survive. Twins were violations of the one-child policy, so one twin would be killed. So there were a lot of deaths of born children killed by lethal injection through the fontanelle, through the soft spot in the child's skull, into the brain of alcoholic formaldehyde. So the total death toll that is attributable to the Chinese Communist Party is a mind-blowing, breathtaking 500 million people. That's 500 million people, which even by China standards is a large number. So as I say, Mao is the killingest man in human history, and the Communist Party that he created and that he still really inspires today in the person of
Hmm.
Xi Jinping is the biggest killing machine in human history. It has terrorized the Chinese people from the beginning.
You mentioned in the book that Xi Jinping it seems to be a ardent, believing communist. But you speak a lot about Mao as using communism sort of as a veneer over his form of legalism, which I thought was really interesting. I hadn't really dove into that before. So I guess my question is this: if someone is a ardent believing communist, or if they're not, at the end of the day, it seems to me that there's really no difference in the outcome. That you can sort of use the guise of communism to do anything you like, which makes it even more demonic. I mean, as you say, it's a fantasy being used for real world applications.
A communist party is a war party. It is organized for conflict. It is organized for terror. It is organized for destruction. Most of the destruction that's visited by communist parties is visited upon its own people, and occasionally the aggression spills out beyond the borders of a communist country. But the someone like Xi Jinping understands very well that the very structure of communism, with its top-down mechanism of control, with its pyramid of power going up through the provincial party secretaries to the central committee, to the Politburo, to the standing committee, the Politburo, and to the general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, is an absolutely excellent tool for controlling the party, and through the party to controlling the total population. So when I say that he's a believing communist, what I mean is that he is thoroughly committed to using the fantasy of communism
Hmm.
to achieve total control over the party and the population of China, so that he is never challenged. And you see that in his behavior over the last 10 years. He has eliminated within the Communist Party um, hundreds of thousands of officials belonging to other factions. He
Hmm.
has decimated those factions, leaving only his own faction, those who supported him from an early date, standing. And the ultimate betrayal was evident at the last party congress, when the former president Hu Jintao, who had been the president before Xi Jinping for 10 years and had supported Xi Jinping's rise and was the head of the only faction left standing, was abruptly lifted out of his seat by the chief of Xi Jinping's security and forced to leave the assembly in the full view of the 400 members of the Central Committee, the full members and the alternate members of the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party. And now his faction, the faction that of Hu Jintao, who had supported Xi from the beginning and was responsible in large part for his rise, is now being purged in China. So
Hmm.
this is how power politics is played in China. And Xi Jinping has no illusions about the dangers of going down the socialist road to ruin. He understands that it will reduce the production of goods, but he doesn't care. He's more interested in producing tyranny than he is in producing feeding and clothing and housing the Chinese people. He wants to stay on top of that power pyramid, and he wants his perch to be as high as possible over the masses, who are far below and essentially expendable. Um, Mao Zedong, when 45 million people died in the Great Famine that he caused by forcing everyone into the commune system in the countryside and destroying the family farm in China. He caused this famine. I call it a Mao-made famine. 45 million people died in China from 1960 to 1962. And what did Mao say? He said, deaths have benefits. He said they fertilize the soil. He thought of his
Hmm.
fellow Chinese as nothing more than human compost, as human fertilizer at the end of the day. And he had no feeling for anyone. And I guarantee you that a creature like Xi Jinping who is not the son of Mao's loins, he's not Mao's biological son, he's the son of Mao's spirit, has equally repressed his humanity and has really no feeling for anyone, perhaps outside his immediate family and his only child, his daughter.
To that end, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the church in China, because you did bring it up in the book, but it seems like the Vatican doesn't understand any of this to any large extent, because they keep trying to make agreements with the Chinese government as if the Chinese government's going to hold up their end of the bargain. It seems hugely problematic.
It is, and I will tell you that I met with senior officials in the Vatican in June of 2018, 6 years ago now, before the Sino-Vatican agreement was put in place. And I warned the Cardinal Secretary of State, the guy who was in charge of the negotiations, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, that the Chinese Communist Party would violate the terms of the agreement before the ink was dry on the paper. They would use the agreement against the Catholic Church in China. They would use the agreement as a tool to infiltrate, seize control of, and ultimately crush the Catholic Church in China. He listened politely, to his credit. I was with him in his office for an hour. And then my heart fell when he said, well, the agreement is already negotiated. We're just waiting for the Chinese side to sign. Well, let me tell you something. The Chinese side has never signed. I know that because last year there was a clear break of what the Vatican had been pretending was the agreement with China. The break came when the Chinese Communist Party, without consulting the Vatican, installed a bishop in Shanghai, the most important see in all of China, but the most Catholics, Shanghai. They put in Bishop Shenbin there. At 3 months later, the Vatican reluctantly recognized Shenbin as the licit bishop of Shanghai. And Cardinal Parolin was asked at the time, why can't we see the terms of the secret agreement? And he said, well, the secret agreement is a working document. It is still under discussion. I guarantee you the Chinese side has never signed the agreement. What we have on the part of the Vatican is a naive, I would say impious hope that the Chinese Communist Party would one day, if they waited long enough, patiently, would one day come to agree to the terms of the agreement that would say, as I understand it, that any appointment of any bishop in China should be done in consultation with the Vatican, and that the Vatican has the right to veto the appointment. That agreement, there is no agreement. There is only a working document that was negotiated by Cardinal Parolin with lower-level Chinese officials, and the Chinese side has never signed it. Would it make a difference if they had? No, I don't think so. But the fact that it is still secret works against Catholics in China, because the agreement is being used to coerce Chinese priests and bishops and laity into joining the schismatic Catholic Patriotic Association. And how is it done? Well, the Catholic Patriotic Association will come to a priest or bishop and say, the Vatican, the agreement we have with the Vatican says that you must join the Patriotic Association. And so they're using the borrowed authority of the Vatican to try to convince bishops and priests and laity to join the church that they control, that they monitor, that they surveil, that they write the homilies for. And if the terms of the agreement, non-agreement, were public, we would all see that that's not part of the agreement. So by keeping the working document secret, the Vatican is actually helping the Chinese Communist Party to control the church in China and force Chinese Catholics to join an organization that is not in union with the church.
That's That's certainly not the impression that I had, or I feel like anyone who's a layperson in the United States would have, that this is an agreement that probably isn't even signed, and it's something that I thought it was ironclad. I thought it was something that was bilaterally negotiated and clear cut. So this is it's not surprising to me, unfortunately, but it's very tragic and unfortunate.
So,
I had a friend who spent some time in China um, just a couple years ago, and he was interacting with a lot of the folks from the underground church, and their their story is one that is very inspiring to me.
yes,
To continue along in fidelity to Christ despite all of the very, very real danger and persecution.
it is.
So for
I'm,
for the sorry, go ahead.
and my next book will be the Catholic Martyrs of Communist China, because
Mm,
there are a lot of martyrs in China, known and unknown, that have died in defense of the faith, that have been persecuted to death. But yeah, we have this agreement, which I'm convinced, having followed it from the beginning and read everything that has been written about it, and everything that has been spoken about it by Chinese officials and Vatican officials. I'm convinced the Chinese side has never signed the agreement, that this agreement has been renewed twice and is about to be renewed again, and it doesn't really exist in
mm,
terms of what we understand as an agreement. The common understanding of an agreement, right, is a compact, is an arrangement, is a contract that both sides have signed and agreed to abide by. That's certainly not the case here.
Do you see any reluctance from Cardinal Parolin or anyone else at the Secretariat of State to continue forward with this arrangement? Are they seeing that the Chinese government is not holding up their end of the quote unquote bargain?
Well, I think that they were close last year when the Communist Party unilaterally installed Bishop Shenping as a
Hmm.
bishop of Shanghai. I think there were open murmurs in the Vatican about the agreement being defunct, no longer enforced. But um, the I believe that the driving force behind the agreement with China, the attempt to negotiate an agreement with China, has been from the beginning has been Pope Francis, and
Mm,
quite frankly, Cardinal Parolin is probably reluctant to go to Pope Francis and say that we haven't really accomplished much by negotiating with the communists.
sure. Well, for for those in the United States, it seems like there's two different camps that we can look at. One is these active martyrs in China who are continuing to keep the faith alive despite persecution. That's sort of after the fact, though. In the United States, we have a preventative role here, which I think your book is a wake up call, if nothing else, uh, to say we need to stop these mechanisms from being put into place, and they are being put into place here in the United States as well. So, how would you advise someone beyond the book? How would you advise the normal American to sort of open their eyes? What sort of things are you seeing?
Well, I think that we face a number of dangers in the United States. There are a couple of external dangers, one of which is China itself, which is quite frankly, our greatest geopolitical threat right now. A country which dominated by the Chinese Communist Party, which wants to dominate the world and has a 100-year plan, which will come to fruition, hopefully, from their point of view, in 2049 when they do dominate the world. That's their plan. We have the World Economic Forum, on the other hand, which consists of our globalist elites who have uh, almost the same level of disdain for ordinary people, ordinary Americans, that the communist elite have for their own people, who think that they can dictate our lives better than we can. That they, like the Communist Party, would be happy to dictate what we eat, how much um, energy we're allowed to use, what our thermostats are set at, how many calories we're allowed to consume every day, how far we're allowed to travel, how many times we're allowed to get on a plane every year, what kind of car we're allowed to drive, how far we're allowed to leave our house, how many times a week are we allowed to leave our house. I mean, they have the same totalitarian mindset, which is now facilitated by the kind of technology that's already in use in China. So I think that our own elites, not just in the World Economic Forum, but here in the United States, when they talk about remote control of your car so that they can disable your car if you're using too much energy, or remote control of your thermostat, or controlling how much carbon dioxide you produce, for heaven's sake. If you control how much energy someone uses or how much carbon dioxide they're emitting, you might as well lock them up in a prison cell, because you can control their behavior as effectively as the Chinese Communist Party does. So I do see the threat of government control here. And it's almost worse to be in thrall to a bunch of do-gooders than it is to be in thrall to a tyrant. Tyrant, has simply wants to maintain his position of power and control. But a do-gooder will continually, for the sake of, I don't know, saving the planet, supposedly, or reducing energy consumption, or stopping the use of fossil fuels, a do-gooder for the greater good will go on and on to interfere with your ordinary life until you have no freedom, literally, to breathe.
Well, it's absolutely the case in my mind that the do-gooders, those who are touting climate change, for example, are just wholesale making things up or believing lies that have been perpetuated for decades. Similar to the population bomb myth that led to the one-child policy, this sort of idea of there's too many people, we need to reduce. So it's a mechanism of use. But when it comes to carbon dioxide, fossil fuels, it's very, very clear that more CO2 in the atmosphere is actually leading to better crop yields and more greenification, and it's doing the opposite of what everyone's saying it's doing. It quite possibly is saving the planet. So it's really it's something that we're going to have to sift through and pay attention to the sourcing of various points of data and quote unquote facts.
Now, I will tell you that the Chinese Communist Party is funding, along with, I think, Russia is funding the Green Movement. So some of the funds for the Green Movement, who propose these radical restrictions on our movement, on our food consumption, on our energy consumption, they're being funded by communist parties, Communist Party of China, which does not wish us well, and understand that they can weaken the United States by, there's an ancient Chinese stratagem called taking the firewood out from under the pot. In other words, you can take some vital strategic resource away from an enemy and prevent him from thriving. Well, I think the Chinese Communist Party, which is busy building a coal-fired power plant every 2 weeks, bringing a new one online, is happy that the Biden administration is now going to shut down the remaining 200 coal-fired power plants in the United States, and has provided funding to the Green Movement to help achieve that end, to weaken its enemy, to literally take the firewood out from under the pot. And the point about the population issue, the population bomb, which was first propagated in the 1960s, and my former colleague at Stanford University, Paul Ehrlich, wrote The Population Bomb, in which he predicted hundreds of millions of people would starve to death in the 1970s because of overpopulation. Well, 10 years before, tens of millions of people had starved to death in China because of government overreach, because of the Communist Party's desire to force everyone into large communes where they would not have families anymore. The men would live in male dormitories, women would live in female dormitories, and the children would all be raised in state nurseries. That project led to absolute disaster. Overpopulation, however, was an idea that was fomented in the West and borrowed by the Chinese Communist Party in 1979. And by 1979, the Communist Party leader, Deng Xiaoping, had been convinced, because of the overpopulation propaganda coming from the West, that China's path to development led through limiting population growth. And so he decreed a one-child policy, killed off half of two generations. And now you have, with typical communist tyrannical overreach, you have China's population aging and dying faster than any human population has aged and died. Why? Because 400 million unborn children and newborn children were abruptly taken out of the population structure. And China's economic prospects now are grim because of the aging and dying of the population. China is no longer the most populous country in the world. It has been overtaken by India, whose economic prospects, because it still has an average of about 2.1 children born per woman instead of China's 1.1 or 1.2. India's economic prospects over the next few decades are much brighter than China's, because China killed off the ultimate resource, the one resource you cannot do without, and that is the human being. And they're going to pay for that mistake. The Chinese people are going to pay for that mistake by the Chinese Communist Party for a couple of generations to come, sadly.
One more just short question I'd like to ask is, looking forward into the future, obviously the CCP has their plan for world domination. Xi Jinping has his plan to maintain power and keep growing in power. But with the population being what it is, as you just described, and economically sort of looking forward, how long can this keep going? I mean, are they just going to have to adapt, or will it all fall apart? Obviously, you don't have a crystal ball, but what are your impressions?
Well, right now, Xi Jinping is doing what Mao did in the 1950s and the 1960s. He's leading China once more down the communist road to ruin. And he's doing that because he is targeting wealth creators. China's economic boom of the 80s and 90s and the early years of this century was driven by American investment, the transfer of American technology to China. It was driven by, in part, by America opening its markets to Chinese goods, which created a thriving market-based export sector in the country. We now have tariffs on some Chinese-made goods, and the flow of capital, the flow of technology to China is slowing down. But China's wealth creators, the billionaires and CEOs, have had a target put on their back because Xi Jinping wants to control everything. And so every board of directors now has a political commissar sitting on it who watches over the company's actions and make sure that the actions of the company serve the party. And Xi Jinping said, he said, I have no trouble with people getting rich as long as they use their wealth to serve the party. Well, the political commissars who now control effectively these companies have figured out the best way to make sure that the billionaires and the CEOs' wealth serves the country is to expropriate their wealth, to do what communists always do, to take away the wealth created by productive people and give it to corrupt officials who produce nothing but tyranny. And so the most dangerous place to be in the world today is a Chinese billionaire, a CEO. They're being arrested, tortured, executed, suicided in large numbers. Suicided means that someone just happens to fall off the balcony of the 25th floor of a high-rise apartment building or business office building. There are so if you destroy the wealth creators in the country and you expropriate their wealth, and the Communist Party, by the way, consumes about a third of all the wealth that China produces each year. So you've got 1 billion hardworking Chinese. You've got 94 million members of the Chinese Communist Party. Those 94 million members of the Communist Party, who do not produce anything but tyranny, consume a third of the wealth in China. About half of that is in corruption. About half of that is to pay their salaries, pay for their resorts, pay for their foreign junkets, their banquets, their limousines, and all the other benefits that come along with being a Communist Party leader. So they have been a great millstone around the necks of the Chinese people ever since the founding of the People's Republic of China. And it is a tribute to the hard work of the Chinese people, their entrepreneurial ability, that China has advanced as far as it has, hamstrung as it has been by the exactions of the Chinese Communist Party. They deserve better. The Chinese people deserve better than the Chinese Communist Party. And will they one day throw off the yoke that has enslaved them? I hope so. Perhaps the ongoing collapse, the slow collapse of the Chinese economy, which is happening in real time right now, the aging of the population, the increasing tyranny of Xi Jinping, the memories that older Chinese have of the Cultural Revolution, the days of Chairman Mao, may all come together in a perfect storm to help remove the Chinese Communist Party from power. But it will take one more thing. It will take the same kind of resolution that President Reagan had towards the Soviet Union. And that kind of resolve, he summarized back in the 1980s. He was asked, Mr. President, what is your policy towards the Soviet Union? And he summed it up in 4 words. He said, we win, they lose. We need a president with that attitude, that we win and the Chinese Communist Party loses. Because if we win and the Chinese Communist Party loses, then the Chinese people win, the world wins. The North Koreans win, the Vietnamese win, the Cambodians win. All of these tyrannical regimes that are being propped up by China will fall one after the other. And we will see a new birth of freedom in the world, as we did after the fall of the Soviet Union. But that takes a recognition that the Chinese Communist Party and the differences between us and the CCP are not resolvable by negotiation or compromise, because we compromise and they don't. There's no sort of living arrangement, modus vivendi, that we can enter into with the Chinese Communist Party. They're at war with us. They've been at war with us since the founding of the People's Republic of China. And if your enemy is at war with you, then you're at war, whether you want to be or not. So we need to win that conflict. And, we made a good start under the first Trump presidency, and hopefully we will continue in the years to come.
Well, thank you for the conversation, Mr. Mosher. I really appreciate it. I also really appreciate your book, The Devil in Communist China, From Mao Down to Xi, from Tan Books. Mr. Mosher, where can people learn more about your work, especially with the Population Research Institute?
Well, our website at the Population Research Institute is simple. It's pop.org. That's pop.org, pop.org. I'm a pop. I have 9 children, but this pop is short for Population Research Institute. We've got lots of information about not just China, but about the myth of overpopulation. Not an innocent myth, a myth that kills and has killed and is still killing. We have lots of information about the ultimate resource, human beings. We encourage people to be fruitful and multiply. We believe that the greatest long-term threat to humanity is too few people, too few children, not too many. Something we've been saying for 30 years. We've recently been joined by Elon Musk. I'm happy to see that. He understands the value of human beings as someone who actually produces things. So come to our website, Population Research Institute, and you can buy a copy of The Devil in Communist China from Tan Books. One word, tanbooks.com, and learn what the primary threat to America is from abroad, and what we're liable to see at home within a few years if we do not change course.
Well, and God willing, we will change course, and I'm thankful for resources such as these to help us see more clearly and move forward, and of course, to unite our prayers with the Chinese people, especially. Mr. Mosher, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.